شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين أبي القاسم محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين وصحابته المنتجبين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر صدق الله العلي العظيم. Brothers and sisters in Islam, brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This being the fifth night, and having gone through several lectures, this is the sixth night, pardon me, and having gone through several lectures, it is imperative that we call a spade, not a big spoon. And having taken my time in introducing the subject, globalization and its effect on society, tonight I would like to go a step further. And going a step further means talking about things I haven't talked about for quite a time ever since we started. And all this is because of looking at very touching traditions of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam says, intellect is that which people worship the most gracious Allah and with which they obtain gardens. And being an intellectual means you are conscious. And being conscious means you are aware of Allah's greatness. When we talk about globalization, we have to define what is globalization. And most of the people that talk about globalization, most of the time don't even have a clue of what globalization is all about. But before getting into intellect and globalization's definition, let me just mention one important aspect of this subject, we are talking about. And this is industrial revolutions. The first industrial revolutions followed the proto-industrialization period. It started at the end of the 18th century to the beginning of the 19th century. The biggest changes came in the industries in the form of mechanization. Mechanization was why agriculture started to be replaced by the industry as the backbone of the societal economy. At the time, people witnessed massive extraction of coal, along with the significant invention of the steam engine that created a new type of energy that later on helped speed up the manufacturing of railroads, thus accelerating the economy. Then came the second industrial revolution in the year 1870. Following the first industrial revolution, we saw the world go through the second almost a century later. It started at the end of the 19th century with massive technological advancements in industries that helped the emergence of a new source of energy, that is electricity, gas, and oil. This revolution resulted in the creation of the internal combustion engine that started to reach its full potential. Other important points of the second industrial revolution were the development of steel demand, chemical synthesis, and methods of communication such as the telegraph and the telephone. Finally, the inventions of the automobile, and the plane at the beginning of the 20th century are the reason why, to this day, the second industrial revolution is considered the most important one. The third industrial revolution came in 1969. Another century passes, and we bear witness to the third industrial revolution. In the second half of the 20th century, we see the emergence of yet another source of untapped, at the time, energy, that is nuclear energy. The third revolution brought forth the rise of electronics, telecommunications, and of course, computers. The third industrial revolution opened the doors to space expeditions, research, and biotechnology through the new technologies. In the world of the industries, two major inventions, programmable logic controllers, that is PLCs, and robots, helped give rise to an era of high-level automation. Industry number 4. For many people, industry number 4 is the fourth industrial revolution. Although a large portion of people still disagree. If we were to view industry number 4 as a revolution, we would have to admit that it is a revolution happening now. We are experiencing it every day, and its magnitude is yet unknown. Industry number 4 started at the dawn of the third millennium with the one thing everyone uses every day, the internet. We can see the transition from the first industrial revolution rooted in technological phenomenon to industry number 4 that develops virtual reality worlds, allowing us to bend laws of physics. The fourth industrial revolution, or the industrial revolution, shaped the world. Worldwide economies are based on them. Programs and projects are being implemented worldwide, focusing on helping people take advantage of the marvels of the fourth revolution during their everyday lives. I mentioned these 4 revolutions because we cannot talk about globalization without going through or referencing the 4. And these 4 revolutions bear witness that this is what brings United Nations with an agenda called Agenda 21, or Agenda for the 21st Century. Some of them call it Agenda 2030. Agenda 21, or Agenda for the 21st Century, is a 300-page, 40-chapter soft law, as they call it. It's a policy document adopted by the delegates to the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, 30 years ago. They built it slowly, gradualistically, to come to the stage we are in right now, 2023. The document is not legally binding. It is a set of policy recommendations designed to reorganize global society around the principles of environmental protection, social equity, and what is called sustainable economic development. In other words, they call it Sustainable Development Goals. At the heart of the concept of sustainable development is the assumption that government must manage society to ensure that human activity conforms to these principles, the Agenda 21. The idea that government is inherently empowered to manage the affairs of society is diametrically opposed to the idea that the just power of government is derived from the consent of the governed. So this is where heads collide now. That's why I said, is it Malia Serikali or is it Malia Umma? As these conflicting principles collide in the arena of public policy, the people who are governed are losing the ability to limit the power of government. Consequently, government power over people is expanding. Remember, I read the verses of Surah Al-Asr. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim wal Asr. Innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Here lies the lines that we are in grave loss except those who believe and do good and advise one another on being just and advising one another on being patient. Now, building on the issue, the subject of globalization entails so much, as we mentioned in our earlier lectures. It entails finance, economics, trade, society, culture, science. All these are entailed in globalization. But what are the bases for globalization? It's control. Control of what? Resources. Control of the human mind, that it must confine itself to the rule of law. Now, being conscious, as we always emphasize, being conscious of Allah makes you conscious of what's happening around you. of what's being planned for you. Nowhere in this transformation more dramatic than in the policies governing private property rights and the use of land and its resources. Agenda 21. It's like twin brothers to globalization. But Agenda 21 has nowhere is this transformation of the Agenda 21 and globalization more dramatic than in the policies governing private property rights and the use of land and its resources. By using the fourth industrial revolution, that is artificial intelligence and the technological revolution that it entails. This transformation is not the result of a deliberate decision made by elected representatives after fair and public debate. It is the result of years of subtle influence and obscure processes relentlessly imposed through the United Nations agencies and organizations, and a multitude of non-government organizations accredited by and sympathetic to the United Nations agenda. Among the most non-governmental organizations that are influential are the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. That's one. IUCN. The Worldwide Fund for Nature, formerly the World Wildlife Fund, and still known as the WWF. And the World Resources Institute, WRI. These three organizations, together with various United Nations agencies and organizations, shaped the policies that are now being implemented in the United States and around the world under the banner of Sustainable Development Goals. These three organizations participated in the preparations for the United Nations Conference on Human Settlements in 1976. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. Where the first formal policy on land use was adopted by a UN agency, many of the land use restrictions now imposed on landowners across the world arise directly from the policy recommendations adopted at this UN conference. 1976. The preamble to the conference, a report on land use, sets the tone for more than 50 pages of a very specific land use policy recommendation, and I would like to quote. Land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice. If unchecked, it may become a major obstacle in the planning and implementation of development schemes. The provision of decent dwellings and healthy conditions for the people can only be achieved if land is used in the interest of society as a whole. Public control of land use is therefore indispensable. End of quote. How many of you, if ever someone is owning any private land, I think Tanzania you don't have that, but in Kenya we have private land. And for your information, today there are demonstrations in my country, and a group or a bunch of people invaded the former president's land, cut trees, burnt everything, and subdivided the land for themselves. Today, as we speak in here. How many of you remember when I was quoting Zbigniew Brzezinski about the youth of the third world? Do you remember what I was quoting here when I was talking to you guys? Let me go a little bit further. I'll go back to the global policy thing. Here is an example of the policy recommendation that follow about the land now. Listen to the wording, make up your mind. Recommendation A, 1. B. All countries should establish as a matter of urgency a national policy on human settlements, embodying the distribution of population over the national territory. I repeat, all countries should establish as a matter of urgency a national policy on human settlements, embodying the distribution of population over national territory. Now, as Tanzanians living in Dar es Salaam or anywhere in Tanzania, those who are living in city centers or town centers, do you see the suburbs that are cropping up by your sides? Do you think this is a coincidence? Now, before I read you these policies, United Nations policies, that sort of emphasizes on nations implementing these policies, has it ever passed by your mind what's going on? Why is this area? Of course, you are worried that Islam never used to be like this. Maybe Arusha was never like this. There is physical planning acts. There are building codes. So what's happening now? Who is supposed to implement them? How come these suburbs are just cropping up? So today you see the policy. Then it goes on to say such a policy should be devised to facilitate population distribution to accord with the availability of resources. Brothers and sisters in Iman, these things are not just mere papers. Remember what I said yesterday. Why do we organize? And I told you 4 things. building the unity of our people, that's why we organize, raising the level of understanding and awareness of our people, bringing about their active involvement in the struggle over issues of daily concern to us all, and giving this unity and involvement structure and form, content, consistency, and direction. How do we achieve this? If, as we are a people who have agreed to disagree, how do we achieve unity of purpose? And there is a bigger object coming towards us with strength and speed unimaginable, just to sway us from the real issues, and this is the LGBTQ issue. There is the issue of weather warfare. All these guys I'm talking to you about, the United Nations, the United States, Britain, they all know about these things. They are part and parcel of the problem. But there is a bigger problem that's within the Muslim community. Let me go up a little bit deeper. How many of you know about Mr. Hemfer, a British spy sent to Iraq and Egypt? I'll quote what they said, or what he said. Pretext Hemfer was offered for his actions. Before we talk about his action, listen to the pretext. And I'll quote, "We, the English people, have to make mischief and arouse schism in all our colonies, in order that we may live in welfare and luxury." Otherwise, only by means of such instigations will we be able to demolish the Ottoman Empire. Otherwise, how could a nation with a small population bring another nation with a greater population under its sway? Look for the mouth of the chasm with all your might and get in as soon as you find it. You should know that the Ottoman and Iranian empires have reached the nadir of their lives. Therefore, your first duty is to instigate the people against the administration. History has shown that the source of all sorts of revolutions is public rebellions. When the unity of Muslims is broken and the common sympathy among them is impaired, their forces will be dissolved, and thus we shall easily destroy them. Should I repeat? This is the British policy by the government telling Mr. Hemfer, sent to Iraq and all these places in the Middle East, to just bring about the destruction of the Muslim community. Now, for us to understand the impact of this policy, we need to go to the agreements between 1798, the year 1798 to 1916, between 10 Middle Eastern countries with the British, either protection agreement or dependency agreement. Well, you might ask yourself, what has this got to do with globalization? That is where it all started. Then there is the Anglo-American establishment, a very good book for those who can read. Write down Anglo-American establishment, leave a space and write PDF. Download the book and read it. On the 17th of October 1798, Sayyid Sultan bin Ahmed, Sultan of Oman, signs protection agreement with the representative of the British East India Company. 1798. 1880, Bahrain signs protection agreement with the British Zionist regime. 1892, 5 states signed dependency agreement with the British Zionist government. These are Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Ras Al Khaimah, Sharjah, and Ajman. Dependency agreement with the British in 1892. 1896, protection agreement, Kuwait and the British. 1915, Saudi Arabia, protection agreement with the British. 1916, Qatar, protection agreement with the British. Right? Now go to the internet, check where these countries are located. It's what they call the Strait of Hormuz. That's the gateway between the Middle East and the Persian Gulf. But what's so funny here, if it is funny, 1916, Qatar signs agreement, protection agreement with the British. 1917, Lord Balfour writes to Lord Rothschild, like, establish the Israeli state now. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Now, this is 1798 to 1916. So, who helped in establishing the Zionist state in the Middle East? Because these guys signing protection and dependency agreement with the Zionist British government means they were part and parcel of the Zionist regime. Because the Ottoman Empire was by then existing. So this is what happened. Zionist empire finished the Ottoman Empire in 1924. This is 1798 to 1916. But what makes it worse, did you know that when Sayyid Said died, his inheritance was divided by the Consul General, British Consul General in India, called Lord Canning. He's the guy who said, Sayyid Majid, take this part of the empire, your dad's empire, and Sayyid Thuwain bin Hamad, take this one. Now look at the names of these countries, look at the security that they have any time when you rise up against them. The Anglo-American establishment gives the British the power to hand over the power to the Americans, and now the Americans are taking care of the security issues. Because these two are part and parcel of the same coin. It's just the two sides, heads and tails. But do you see the effect that it has to Muslims around this area? Now, do you see the Mapinduzi thing in 1964? If the British didn't want the revolution, it would never have happened. Look for a book called U.S. Foreign Policy and Revolution by Amrit Wilson. Read the book and see what happened, how it was pre-planned. So when we talk about globalization, we are talking about something we need to know the historic past. We need to know what time it is. Who played that part during the historical time? And can he be a friend now? Who is going to save us from this if we don't unite? Who's going to tell us the truth about these things if we don't want to research, read, and institutionalize our lives? Now, when it comes to globalization, when it comes to industrial revolution, it was the British who started the first one. And this is what they were saying. I didn't finish it up because we still have some time. We'll have to go. Who is Mr. Hemfer? Whom did he mold within the Islamic community, within the Islamic society, to impart this fitna into the society? We'll come to that. Mr. Hemfer molded someone. Now, who is this someone? Same as they cut down the Middle Eastern countries into spheres of influence, they did the same to Africa. 1884, the Berlin Conference. They cut our countries into spheres of influence. Germany had Tanganyika, the British had Kenya and Uganda. But like I told you here, how many of you know that 1833 Americans had an embassy in Zanzibar? 1840, the British had an embassy in Zanzibar. 1844, the French had an embassy in Zanzibar. They were doing business with the sultans. Slavery, ivory, and all this, they all did together. But they were relying on the doctrine of discovery. It's an international law for colonization. You have that right. Say that he abides by the rule, whether he's Muslim, Christian, or just anybody in this land, or if he doesn't abide, then you have every right to even terminate him or her. That's the doctrine of discovery. That's why they come in as missionaries. Then there's a company behind it to fund. If not, then comes the charter. Now you become an Imperial British East Africa Company. First you are British East Africa Company, from British East India Company. But when you progress and you give us hope, we'll give you the charter to use the word Imperial. British East Africa Company. Now, the question is, how does one come and make you, whether you are an Arab, an Asian, European, Chinese, how do they make you feel like a second-class citizen? While there is enough evidence, ample evidence, to show that Asians, Arabs, Chinese, and Persians have been doing business with these shores, this littoral part of East and Central Africa, East and Southern Africa, the coastal part. We've been doing business since AD 45, AD 60. How does one make you a second-class citizen? You've been around for 2,000 years. But who's going to tell you that you have every right like any African? In Kenya, they blindly Africanized everything, which is very wrong. For example, a Luo came down from southern Sudan with the Acholi and Lango, who are in Uganda. In fact, Luos were Ugandans till 1926. That's when the British brought them inside Kenya. Luo, Luhya, Kisii, Nandi. That's why you find Karamojong on that side and Turkana on this side. Then there are Turkanas in Ethiopia because of spheres of influence. There are Maasais in Kenya and Maasai in Tanzania. There are Digos in Kenya and Digos in Tanga. There are Segejus on both sides. Right? But historically, who came first? If I was on the coastline for 2,000 years, when did you come to Dar es Salaam? Why, when you come to Dar es Salaam, because you are blacker than me, you are darker skinned than me, why make me a foreigner? These are the questions we have to ask as we put unity in first place. So you must feel like you belong to this place to be able to give out the heart and mind, because this is where people fight. This is where they aim. Their objective is to conquer you in your heart and mind. For you to agree wholeheartedly that you don't belong here, then they've conquered you half. But if you know your history, then you have every right like any other Tanzanian or Kenyan or Ugandan in this area. Now, globalization is something that is interdependent, indivisible. We depend on one another. So they want to open up, they want to kill sovereignty. So that, you know, sometimes we just use an ID card and we go. Sometimes it's just one ID card for all the countries. One currency. This is where globalization is taking us. Free market. Mixture of cultures. Interrelationship. Now, question is, are we ready for this? Do we know what it is all about? How are we going about these things? Who has come to us and educated us or informed us about what globalization is? What are the consequences? What are the do's and don'ts of globalization? This is what our subject is all about, and inshallah we'll go deeper into this subject as we move on. As you can see, we always take a step forward and we'll go to a time where we'll be able to analyze globalization, its proper perspective, from an Islamic perspective. If they say it's like this, what are the do's and don'ts? What are the borders into these things? Where should we go or not? What should we touch or not touch? My time is over. I say thank you very much. If there's any questions, please, I'll take some questions. If not, I say assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.